There is near universal agreement now that Tuesday's surprise win by Republican Bob Turner further complicated the already convoluted House redistricting process. However, there is no consensus on who exactly will be most hurt by the GOP victory in a Democratic district that was widely believed to be slated for elimination as the state prepares to lose 2 seats. Now, some believe that 3 Western New York Democrats, that would be Louise Slaughter, Brian Higgins, and Kathy Hochul, are now in imminent danger. Congressman Maurice Hinchey, who is a Hudson Valley Democrat, could also be in trouble. And Turner himself is not necessarily safe just because he happens to be the Republican hero of the moment. His district could be carved up, possibly forcing him to choose between a very short House career and running against a seasoned Democrat like Gary Ackerman, who's next door in Queens, or maybe even a fellow Republican like Staten Island's Michael Grimm. My next guest has some unique insight into the redistricting dance. Back in 2002, former Congressman John LaFalce, he saw his Western New York district carved right up, forcing him into a primary against Slaughter. He chose instead to retire. Thank you for your time, Congressman. It is always good to see you.
It's good being with you, Liz.
So you remember quite well, I'm sure, the anxiety of this sort of situation. Were you worried at the time back in 2002?
Well, I wasn't worried, but I was anxious because I didn't know what I was going to do. I was considering retirement at that time, regardless of how the district lines were drawn. But I was still hopeful that the district lines would be drawn in such a way that either I or some person of my choosing might be able to run and win in a Democratic seat.
Right.
And the difficulty is it wasn't resolved until, as I recall, late July of 2002, shortly before the election. In previous decades, the redistricting was done much earlier.
Yeah, actually, we might be headed for a late decision again because right now there's a bit of a standoff between Governor Andrew Cuomo, of course, who says he'll veto anything that isn't, quote unquote, independent and done outside the political process, and the legislature, which is moving ahead with their process, not independent. And of course, there's that prison gerrymandering lawsuit. So this all could get caught up in the courts and make things quite difficult. I mean, you know, as an elected official, you got to raise money. You got to declare yourself. I mean, what happens then?
Well, I'm sure that every person who might be a candidate is out raising money right now.
Right.
And they're claiming that they might have the most difficult race in the world, and this enables them to raise even more money. One of the difficulties is, though, they don't know where to spend their time campaigning for votes because half their district might be taken away from them, and they don't know which half.
Right.
So that presents real dilemmas, and a million other dilemmas too.
Right. I mean, and that we should also remind viewers that that's true. The situation that you just discussed about not really knowing where your district lines are for everyone, even if the people who are currently not in danger of losing their seats because they're probably not going to be redistricted into a primary situation or a so-called quote-unquote fair fight with someone of the opposite party, still they're going to be redistricted somewhere into a place that is probably not familiar because the lines have to change based on population shifts in the state. Do I have that right?
The lines have to change, and the districts have to increase in population.
Right.
So right now it's 600 and some thousand. I believe it's going to have to go to 700 and some thousand, and that's because of the fact that there will be 2 fewer seats.
So let's start with Western New York, obviously the area that you know best. Are you worried now for Kathy Hochul? She, of course, was a big Democratic star. She is a protege of yours, if I'm not mistaken. I remember you on that stage the night that she won. Have you talked to her about this at all?
Well, Kathy and I are very, very close. She was a counsel of mine for 3 years in the 1980s, and just is a terrific person, and I think thus far has been a terrific member of Congress. I think Kathy is going to do quite well no matter what they do. They couldn't give her a district that's much more Republican than her present district.
True.
And so I think she would do well there. If she picks up any Democratic territory, I think she'll do even better. If they put her into a fight with another Democrat, I think it's most unlikely that it would be Brian Higgins. I think the greater probability, since she shares Erie County with Louise Slaughter and Niagara County and Orleans County and Monroe County with Louise Slaughter, I think there's a greater likelihood that those two would be put together rather than Kathy and Brian Higgins. Now, in that scenario, Louise is now 80-something.
Yep.
I'm not sure whether she would run. She might decide to do what I did 10 years or so ago and say it's time to do something else.
Right.
But I don't know that at all. I mean, Louise loves being a member of Congress and might want to be a member of Congress for as long as she lives. But depending upon the district, either one could win. But I would put my money on Kathy winning. I think that she would be much more attractive to the voters as a future representative for them.
Yeah, this is an interesting scenario. I mean, first of all, it's generally the folks, not always, but oftentimes the folks who are up there in years, who have been around for a while and might be perceived as quote-unquote weak. I mean, Maurice Hinchey just went through a difficult re-elect, and also he had cancer surgery. Now, he might also, at some point, he was targeted, talked about potentially being targeted, and then, as I mentioned, Gary Ackerman, another veteran who was also mentioned as possibly in trouble unless they change the boundaries of New York 9 to strengthen his district. I mean, this is all very complicated, and how difficult is it when Democratic Party leaders come to you, as I'm sure they did, and say, hey, you really need to do this for the good of the party?
Well, number one, they didn't come to me, so nobody said, do this for the good of the party to me. I did what I did on my own volition. Now, I wasn't that close with the Democratic Party leaders either. I had been out of the state legislature since 1974. Now, Louise has been out quite a while, but Kathy Hochul was never in, and Brian Higgins had some difficulties with Speaker Shelley Silver.
Oh, yes, he did.
So it could go anyway. It could go anyway. And it's also, dealing with Louise Slaughter, it's not just Louise Slaughter, it's her county chairman, Joe Morelli, who might want a good seat for Louise for one more term so that he could take the seat over after she does finally retire. I think Joe has long had his eyes on that seat. I think that's one of the reasons that his house wound up in the district that was designed for either Louise or myself. And
we should also note that Joe Morelli, an assemblyman, is quite close to Andrew Cuomo. He, in fact, is a longtime Andrew Cuomo supporter, even...
well, that's true. And also, Bob Duffy is the lieutenant governor. He's the former mayor of the city of Rochester. I think there's a desire on the part of both the Democratic chair and the Republican chair to have a Rochester area seat. Now, if there is a Rochester area seat, take away Louise Slaughter. If Louise Slaughter runs, I think she wins it hands down. But take away Louise Slaughter, and a Rochester-based seat with almost the entirety of the rest of Monroe County becomes a fair fight seat.
Right. Now, well, let's just briefly, before we run out of time, talk about some folks who probably are breathing a bit of a sigh of relief. Anne Marie Burkle, for example, her district was talked about as one that was potentially on the chopping block. Also, now, it looks like...
Well, let's not jump to conclusions, Liz, because you could create a fair fight between Turner and Grimm.
Yep.
And that's your Republican seat, and you could create a fair fight between Burkle and somebody else, or you could create a fair fight with Louise Slaughter and Burkle, combine Rochester, Syracuse, quite
that'd be
easily.
A tough one.
And then you can combine Turner with some Democrat from the New York City area.
Yep.
Yeah. Another thing that I'd like to point out, I have a sneaking suspicion in the back of my mind that you haven't seen the last of Anthony Weiner. I think he'd love to go back to Congress, so he resigned because there was a great desire for him to resign by House Democrats, particularly in the leadership. But he still has $1 million in his campaign war chest.
Yeah, good point.
And he still has considerable popularity. And so in the state of New York, too, you can run from any place you live in any district in the state.
Right, right.
So regardless of where he lives in New York City, he could run in any congressional seat in New York City or upstate New York. And chances are, if he were going to run, he'd run for a congressional seat that comprised the bulk of his former congressional district. I wouldn't rule that out.
That's fascinating. Well, yeah, we should remind viewers there's no residency requirement per se. It's kind of a gray area. You have to reside in the state.
Well, there's a state residency.
Right. You have to reside in the state.
There's a state residency requirement.
But you don't. But reside is pretty loose. I mean, Joe Crowley, who is the Queen's Democratic chairman, taking it on the chin for selecting David Weprin, has a house in Virginia where his kids and his wife live. So that's he does keep a residence in the district. All right. So unfortunately, you and I could probably talk about this for quite some time. I don't want viewers to get too down into the weeds with us. However, I do want to
ask me back, Liz.
I will.
Ask me back.
But I do want to remind people just this example of the back and forth that we're having here demonstrates to you how difficult and politically challenging this is for the powers that be. It's going to be pretty interesting to watch. In the meantime, I want to thank you very much, Mr. LaFalce. It's great to see you.
Same here.